Full Stack Basics presents Master JavaScript. Unlock the power behind the frameworks. Full Stack Basics, Production, Learn Tech in Microsteps. Create a production-ready Kanban board with the MERN stack, including Google Single Sign-On and drag and drop. Learn more at fullstackbasics.io/projects.
We're still working on DevTruth number 6. If you don't understand state, you don't understand React. And as you can see, we are tracking our transactions, and whenever we add an income or an expense, when we add the transaction, it actually updates the state, which is the balance here, right away. And also, if we go to inspect, after right-clicking on the document and go to application, you will see that we're actually keeping the transactions in local storage. So now it's time to do the same thing in React. First thing I want to suggest is that you right-click here and delete all the transactions so that then we don't have anything stored in the browser when we do the React version. Now I'm going to open my terminal. I'm going to change directory to my desktop, DevTruths projects. Once I'm here, we are going to create our new boilerplate React app so that we can do this in React. I'm going to expand my terminal so that you can see the command in one line. Go ahead and hit enter. This is going to create a new folder in your DevTruths project folder like you can see here. Now it's time to open this with VS Code and do some cleanup. In here, we're going to start by installing the dependencies needed to run the React application. For this, I'm going to open the terminal and simply execute the command npm install. When everything goes well with this command, you're going to see the node modules folder created. Next, I'm going to go to source and index.css. And I am simply going to delete everything inside of index.css. We're going to do the same thing with app.css. Once everything is deleted from app.css, then we're going to include styling for our React application. Let's start with the body and the h1 element. Pause and implement this. Then we're going to continue on with the form and the input button, like so. Please pause and implement these two properties. Now that we're done with this, I'm going to scroll up a little more and implement styling for the button, the on order list, and the list item. Please pause and implement this. Lastly, I'm going to scroll up just some more here so that we can get to the bottom, and we're going to include the classes for income and expense. Please pause and implement this. With this done, we're going to head back to app.jsx. We're going to get rid of the logo imports, get rid of the count here, and get rid of everything in between the fragment, like so. All that we should be left with is the fragment here. Pause and make sure that you're here. Now that we're here, let's start with the imports. Because now that we learn how to manage state with vanilla JavaScript, we're going to use some of the tools that React provides for this. We're going to use useState like we have used before in this series, but we're also going to include useEffect like so. Please pause and update your import. Then we are going to include a state variable for the transactions. Now this one is going to be a little different because unlike vanilla JavaScript, this one is also going to be a state variable. And here in useState, as you can see, we have this set of brackets, right? This initial set of brackets, and inside here we have something called an anonymous function. So we have this empty set of brackets, then the arrow, then this set of curly braces, and basically we return getting the items from local storage or an empty list. Make sure that your syntax is correct. Pause and implement. We're also going to create state variables for the input fields. This is the description and the amount. Pause and implement. Now we are going to use useEffect. And for that, we're going to work right above the return statement. So let me implement this and then I'll explain what useEffect is for. So first we're going to call it useEffect. We already have the import. We're going to include a set of brackets, and inside here I'm going to include another set of brackets followed by an arrow and then a set of curly braces. And in here, what I'm going to do is set the transactions in local storage like so. And finally, as you can see, we do need transactions so we can set the item. So it is a dependency for useEffect to do its job. So right here, right after the curly brace, I'm going to include a comma, I'm going to include an array, and in here, I'm going to declare that transactions. Yes, this state variable up here is a dependency for this useEffect. Please pause and implement. Let's actually discuss what this really means. useEffect is a built-in React tool that pretty much says, when data changes, run some code automatically. In even simpler terms, useEffect means every time transactions change, run this function to save them to local storage. Transactions change when we submit the form to include a new transaction. And as you can see, we do depend on those transactions, or in that transaction state variable, changing. Hence why it is a dependency in this array list here. Now, we need to handle the submission of the form. So I'm going to minimize a few things here, and we're going to keep on working right above the return statement. Here, I want you to create an arrow function called handle submit, like so. This handle submit function takes the event as a parameter. So we're going to start implementing this. The first thing that this does is prevent default behavior. Then it checks if the description or the amount are blank, and if so, we stop the program. Finally, if everything is in order with the input, it sets the transaction with the new transaction in the form and sets the input fields back to blank. As you can see, we're using the set transaction statement from the transactions state variable. Please pause and implement. Finally, outside of the handle submit, which I'm going to minimize, we need to calculate the total using a reducer function. What this line of code here in the total reads is go through every transaction and keep a running total of how much money we have based on the amounts in each item. Pause and implement this. We have the logic now. So let's go ahead and work on the JSX. So here in the return, I'm going to get rid of this semicolon here. I'm going to include a set of brackets. I'm going to also make some room in between the fragment. And here we're going to go a little faster. First, implement the H1 with the budget tracker title and an H2 with the balance. Next, we're going to implement a form. And instead of action, as we recall, React gives you a property called onSubmit. And we want to call the handle submit function whenever the form is submitted. Pause and implement. In here, then we're going to include the input field for the description. Remember here, the value is linked to the state variable, and also we need to capture the event when that changes, and then we set that state variable to the value in the event target, which is going to be, in this case, the input field in the browser. Pause and implement. Now we're going to do the same thing with the amount. So I'm going to make some room here. I'm going to save just to reformat. Please pause and implement this. The last thing we're going to do inside of the form is to include the submit button. Please pause and implement. Now that your form is correct, I'm going to minimize this just so that we have some more room. I'm going to make some space here, and I'm going to include an unordered list like so. I'm going to make some room, and then I'm going to include a pair of curly braces because we want to include some logic here. What do we want here? Well, the first thing is that we want to map through all the transactions. I'm going to include a pair of brackets here. Go ahead and do the same. When we map through the transactions, we have the transaction itself and the index of each transaction inside of the list of transactions. Pause and implement. I'm going to include now a little arrow here and another set of brackets, and I'm going to make some room here so that we can include some additional logic inside of the map function. Pause and implement. Now in here, I'm going to include a list item. So basically what I'm saying here is that each transaction is its own list item. Now in the opening tag, we need to include some properties. First, because we're handling this list in React, each list item needs a key, and the key is going to be the index of that item in the list. Please pause and implement. Remember how we created that conditional class name that if it was income, it would be green, and if it was an expense, it would be red? Well, here we can include it right in the opening tag, as you can see here. We're basically saying for class name, if the amount is equal or larger than 0, then set the income class, if not the expense class. This is a great way to have conditional logic in React. Pause and implement. Now, in between the list item, what do we want to display? Exactly the same that we displayed in vanilla JavaScript. We want the description and we want the amount. Please pause and implement. I'm going to save just to reformat. Make sure that the syntax is correct on your end. Now that this is done, I'm going to just open this up. You can take another look. And I think now we can open our terminal and run our application. Over at the browser, let's go ahead and include first your income. So I'm going to include your salary at $1 million. And then why don't we rent out a private plane? Just because you had that keynote speech to deliver and you needed to get there in time. So I'm just gonna set this to $50,000. I have no idea how much a private plane costs, but I guess it's a good chunk of money, so I'm going to add this here. And as you can see, everything is looking good. We have our balance. We have obviously the list of transactions, and everything is working fine. So what have we learned here? Well, it is very simple. We build exactly the same thing with React. And the moral of the story is that React gives you tools like useState and useEffect to manage data and sync it with local storage. And in the grand scheme of things, it was easier to implement this with React, but only because you understood what was happening underneath. Perfect. I'll see you in the next episode where we're going to uncover truth number 7.